Now that our menu of fish is being persisted to Firebase and reinstated every single time that I refresh, let's turn our attention to order, which is not being persisted. And every time I refresh, I totally lose my order. So I'm going to show you another way to persist data that's not in a database, but sometimes you just need to keep data in the user's browser so that if they come back to it or they change pages or they refresh, then we can reinstate it. We're going to be doing it in local storage. And if you've never heard of local storage before, it's kind of like cookies, but a little bit easier to work with. And it's a key value token, meaning that we can grab a whole bunch of keys and then you can store values along with them. And then you can come back to that at a later point in time and pull that data and put it back into your application. So you can see that Firebase actually uses local storage itself. There's some fish IDs that are being pulled in here from previously when I was testing my other local app. And then there's other things like other applications. I by chance use this local storage 3000 for other applications. So I've got some tokens here that is used for authentication, and I'm not really sure what this is from, probably from some other application running on localhost. If you're ever not sure, you can always just clear it out, delete everything, refresh your browser, and then you'll see that you'll see all of the different data that is being added from your application on PageLoad. So let's go back to our application here. And we want to persist this order state in local storage. So we are in the app component, that makes sense, but we need to talk about a couple of other different lifecycle methods. So the other one that we're going to be using is called component did update. And this is something that is invoked immediately after updating occurs. This method is not called for the initial render. And that's perfect for us because as soon as it's loaded, and as soon as someone modifies their order, what we want to do is to update our local storage, showing us that this is exactly what they've added to their order. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go to component did mount. We'll go underneath here. We'll say component did update. And sometimes I like to put that above my will unmount so you can kind of see the whole life cycle of this thing happens first and this happens next. So component update, let's just console log. It updated. And we'll go, and every time I add something to my order, you see that it updated is being called, which is good. Okay, good. Now let's take a look. Also, there are no arguments. Sometimes you're going to see something like component did catch or set state. You're going to see that it takes arguments here, and component will update takes no arguments because if we need to be able to access props or state, we simply just need to use this.props or this.state. So let's console log this.state.order every single time that we modify our order. Good. So we're seeing that our order state is there. Now, how do we stick that into our actual local storage? Well, it's pretty simple. We simply just say local storage, capital S, dot set item. And the item that we're going to set is, well, we can't just say order because this is going to be for a specific, oh, that's terrible. Panicky, unsightly wise. Let's go to a better one. There we go. Load it in, add to order. We want to store the order for that specific store. So the question is, where do you get the store name? That can come from props. Remember this dot props dot match dot params dot store ID. So we're going to use the key, which is the left-hand side application. That's going to be this. And then the value is going to be this.state.order. Now, let me show you what happens when that actually happens. To get rid of that, save, load some sample, or we don't need to load sample fishes because they already are. And now when I modify it, look what's happening. We are getting the key of ugliest nervous diagnoses, but the value is object to object. And the reason why, if you're ever wondering, like, how come I always see this object to object? That's because if you ever try to convert an object to a string, so like if I have like const Wes is equal to name is Wes, if I ever have an object and I try to like alert it Wes, you'll see that it says object as well. And that's because anytime you try to put an object into a place where a string is required, the browser will just say, oh, I was expecting a string, but you gave me something else. So I'm just going to call the .toString method on that. And that's where it gives you object, which is not much use to us. So what we need to do is convert that object to a string representation. And that's exactly what JSON.stringify does. And if I pass West to that, you'll see that it gives me the string version of what that actual object is. And that's what we're going to use to store in our database. So just take your gist.state.order and wrap it in a JSON, capital JSON.stringify. Now go back to your application tab. We're going to be watching this. And then every time I update my order, that local storage is going to work. And if I refresh the page, you'll see that, oh, for a split second, it is being updated. But then I refresh, watch real quick. It's there for a second, and then it updates to a blank object. And that's because when the component mounts, we are updating state, which is in turn triggering component did update. So what we need to do is, but when we mount, we need to first just reinstate the local storage. So first reinstate our local storage. So we will say const local storage ref is equal to local storage dot get item. Local storage is super easy. It's dot set item, dot get item, and I think it's dot remove item to delete it. And we want to get the item from the params dot store ID. Actually, we don't need backticks there. And let's just console log local storage ref just to see what we got there. Is null. It shouldn't be null. Oh, capital ID. This is my entire life is deciding whether ID should be camel cased or not. So so put a lowercase d there. And now let's add some items to our order and then refresh. And we'll see that this is our local storage ref right here, which is fish1. And we had 7 of them. So what we want to do is take that local storage ref, which is going to be fish7, and set it to state. But sometimes we're going to be visiting a brand new store and there might not be anything in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if there is a local storage ref, then we are going to say this.setState, and we are going to update the order to be, and you might think like we can just set it to local storage ref, but what is local storage ref? It's a string, right? We need to turn it back into an object because that's what it's expecting. So wrap that thing in the opposite of JSON.stringify, and it's JSON.parse. That will turn it back from a string into an object. So if there is a local storage value, you're going to reinstate it. Now, if I add some items to my order, add some lobster, and refresh. Oh no, what happened? Cannot read property status of undefined. I don't actually know what the issue is here, but I think it would be helpful to watch me debug this. So my first idea is this order actually getting parsed? So I'm going to console log JSON parse local storage ref, and we'll also do a console log of restoring it. Then go back to the app here. And we see restoring it, and we also see that our fish is right there. So that's good. There's nothing wrong with this, and it's being set to state. Let's take a quicker look at the actual error. Cannot read property status of undefined. So, oh, there we go. It's is available fish.status. So what's happening actually here is that we're looping over all of the keys in our render order. But what's happening is that there actually is no fish. And so you're trying to get status of something that doesn't exist, which is the fish. So that's a bit of an issue. So one thing we probably could do here is we could say if there is a fish first and there's a fish status, but why is there no fish? Let's talk about that for a quick second. And what's happening here is that when the component mounts, we are checking local storage, and if it's there, we are setting that to state, and then we are setting up our sync state. And there's a bit of an issue here because local storage is local and it's going to be immediate. It's going to be immediately set to this. The problem with this rebase is that there is a split second where you have to go to Rebase or go to Firebase and come back with the actual data. And then what's happening is we're trying to render out the order before the fishes actually exist, right? Because when we load the page, the fishes are empty until they can come back from Firebase and be put back into our state. That's what Rebase is doing. It's syncing it back into it. So like, should we wait on this or something like this? And there's a couple things that we could do here. We could say, first, we could just check if we could just say it's not available. So we could say fish and fish.status. So we're going to check if there is a fish and the fish status is available. So we check if there is a fish and the fish status is available. So let's take a quick look here. I've got a bunch of fishes in there, but you see how it like sort of like quickly flashes, sorry, that fish is no longer available. And that's because as we load it, the fishes aren't there. And then as the fish get put in, we will re-render that. So that's not great. And what we could do here is before we even render that out, we could just say, if there is no fish, we can do this down here, then return null. And if you return null from anything, it will just render out absolutely nothing. So let's see this. So you see now it's just an empty order until the fish get put in, and then it's updating for us. So I'm pretty happy with that. We'll put a little comment on that. Make sure the fish is loaded before we continue. Good. So that is fixed. Now we are reinstating our storage. Let's try it real quick with another. So this is Ugliest Nervous Diagnoses, and I'm going to go back to my store picker and go to a new one, load some sample fishes, add some to the order, and then I'm going to go back to that initial one, and it reinstates my old one because in our application now we have 2 stores worth of data being pushed into our local storage.